addition, Rodriguez has been appointed as Presidential Chief of Staff, a new position under the direct supervision of the President.
Kinontra ni Presidential Legal Counsel Juan Ponce Enrile na palawakin ang kapangyarihan ni Attorney Vic Rodriguez bilang Presidential Chief of Staff matapos itong magbitiw bilang Executive Secretary.
Nakita namin na yung linalaman ng proposal ay sasakupin lahat yung mga opisina na yun. May babanggaan yan.
The Marcos government has lost its first executive secretary 21 days before its first 100 days in office. Talks of a power struggle are not letting up, but analysts say, in fairness, this is not an exclusive occurrence in this regime. Past administrations have also had their shares of controversy. We discuss how palace politics plays out in this episode of The Chiefs. Welcome to The Chiefs. Ako po si Roby Alampay. Maya-maya makakasama po natin. Kasama pala natin sa studio. Kasama natin sa studio ngayon, Ed Lingao.
Katabi kita eh.
Sorry, yung script hindi updated. Kasama po natin ngayon sa studio, Ed Lingao of One News. And ngayon din, kasama natin online from Quezon City, from News 5, Luchi Cruz-Valdes, and from Manila, Pamintuan of the Philippine Star. Chief, sorry, Monday ang umpisa natin.
Happy weekend.
Happy Monday.
Happy Monday. Orient ourselves.
Oo nga. I-orient mo.
Wag mo na weekend.
I-orient mo nga kami, Ami. Let's start off the week. Ano bang mga malaking balita ngayong linggo? Mayroong mga malalaking balita, ha?
Pero puro muna sa foreign nyo. Dalawa inaabangan natin ngayon. Yung ongoing na funeral for Queen Elizabeth. And of course, the visit in New York of President Marcos.
Mainit ang salubong ng Filipino community sa kanya doon sa New York, and we are awaiting, of course, his address to the
New
UN
Jersey also.
General Assembly. Pero over the weekend, Ami, and this is going to be our parang set the table for us, for our first guest. May nangyayari sa Malacañang.
Of course, medyo mawawalan ng executive. Wala na tayong little president, pero magkakaroon ng chief of staff. So, hindi natin alam kung ano magiging diferensya. Meron ng mga...
Parang White House.
Oo nga. Oo. Tatanong natin siguro yung kung, well, I guess hindi rin niya alam dahil nung panahon nila wala rin ganun eh.
Pero teka, lilinawin ko lang yung balita because you said wala tayong little president pero ano ba, meron pa ring position ng executive secretary, di ba? May mga na-float na nga na pangalan eh.
Meron nga daw na baka mag-appoint. But we don't know dahil siyempre, sabi nga ni Chief Legal Counsel Juan Ponce Enrile, baka magkaroon ng duplication of function. So hindi natin alam, baka ini-streamline Malacañang. Di ba?
Although that also depends kasi kung ano yung in-approve dun sa AO na pinirma ng Pangulo bago siya umalis. Kasi under the proposed AO and the SO of Attorney Vic Rodriguez, there were some duplications of functions between the Chief of Staff, as proposed, and the Executive Secretary. So, of course, the magic question now is, ano yung nakasulat in black and white dun sa...
Akala ko ba it was vetted by the Presidential Legal Advisor? I mean, Juan Ponce Enrile.
The legal advisor thumbed down the draft supposedly submitted by Secretary Rodriguez. What we don't know is kung anong version itong pinirmahan nung weekend.
Okay. Sige.
Kung ano yung kasama doon at anong tinanggal.
Okay. Sige. Ipasok natin itong first guest natin because he does know, has some ideas on how things are supposed to work or sometimes don't work in Malacañang. We speak with our first guest after a short break. Keep it right here on One News. gatekeeper of the presidency. That is how the chief of staff position is described in the United States. But how will this affect or be implemented under our government structure now that the executive secretary or the former executive secretary may soon take on that post, chief of staff? Now, we now ask former presidential spokesperson, Attorney Edwin Lacierda. Good evening, sir. Welcome back to the Chiefs.
Good evening, Roby. Good evening, Ed, Ami, and Luchi.
Sir, unti-untiin natin to. Huwag natin isabay-sabay lahat ng mga posisyon. I know a lot of people want to ask. But umpisahan natin dun sa executive secretary. We take it for granted. We keep saying it, little president, little president. I mean, ano ba talagang trabaho ng executive secretary?
Yung executive secretary really what we call, there's a Latin term for him. He's the primus inter pares. He's the first among equals. No, he signs by authority of the president. So his role is quite, I think, in the hierarchy of cabinet secretaries, he's the first. And so we defer to him because that position is really very sensitive. His office is within the office of the president, yeah. And so it requires a lot of interaction with the president, and he signs by authority of the president. He can sign for and on behalf of the president. That's why all the executive orders are signed by authority of the president through the ES. So his role, and by the way, his role is clearly defined in the revised administrative code, the administrative code governing the entire Philippine offices, the executive branch.
Okay,
That role is very clear.
Okay, now very, very quick question and may konting ano na dito. But given how powerful and how sensitive that position is, in the context of the first 100 days of an administration, I mean, how does that strike you as an objective observer? If within the first 100 days, the very position of executive secretary changes this quickly, this abruptly?
There are only a number of reasons why you resign from especially the office of the executive secretary. And I say this objectively. You resign either you're incompetent, you're corrupt, or your family, you want to spend more time with the family, or you have a lingering illness. So those are the reasons why you leave. And it's really, he's less than 3 months, I think, in office. And that I don't recall anyone leaving before his confirmation has been approved or he has been confirmed. No? So it really boggles my mind. It really raises some questions why he had to resign. And he doesn't resign totally from the office of the executive secretary. He resigns and moves to presidential chief of staff. That says something. That can he manage the bureaucracy within the palace? Is there something wrong? Is there something not right going on in the office? Because why move from one position in the palace to another position in the palace? Is that a signal that the president thinks that you're not capable of handling that particular position? It brings a lot of questions into mind.
Apparently, he's not just moving from one position to the other. He's also trying to bring some powers from one position to the other. I mean, in the proposed admin order and the special order, there appear to be some functions and the authorities that he wants to be vested on the old position of chief of staff. Pero sir, sige, let's lay the baseline first. Ano ang chief of staff vis-a-vis yung executive secretary? What's the difference in terms of powers?
Like Roby, I think, mentioned the White House, or Ed, I don't know, I forget who mentioned it. The White House is a chief of staff, but they don't have an executive secretary because the White House chief of staff performs the functions of the executive secretary. He's also the primus inter pares among the cabinet secretaries in the White House. So, it's correct that the Chief Presidential Legal Counsel, Secretary Juan Ponce Enrile, mentioned that there will be duplication of duties. If I recall, and I'll just give you a bit of an anecdote, in our time, President Aquino also wanted to appoint a chief of staff in the person of Secretary Mar Rojas. But, there was also a recognition that there might be some difficulty, there might be some duplication of duties. So rather than clarify and delineate the whole thing properly, you're messing it up because the revised administrative code really has already strict, clear functions of the executive secretary, and the chief of staff does not have any description in the revised administrative code. So the potential of having duplication is there, and JPE was able to find that it really was some duplication of duties, which will cause internal conflict within the office of the president. So I think it was a wise legal opinion provided by Mr. Juan Ponce Enrile.
Mr. Lacierda, since you brought it up, who proposed to Noynoy Aquino that the Office of the Chief of Staff be set up? Bakit naisipan yun?
Because tapos na yung 1-year ban ni Mar because he lost the vice presidential election. So he felt that why don't we put in someone also here in the cabinet whom he trusts also fully, which is in the person of Mar Rojas. And he was the one who suggested to put him as chief of staff.
And just in case, ano yung magiging powers niya? Ano yung magiging division of powers? Because at that time, I remember, well, I don't know if it's true, no? Kasi parang pinagsasabong si Marnon saka si Xiao Chua, the Executive Secretary. Ano yung magiging division of labor sana nila? Because it might be the model as well under this new situation.
We never reached that point. We never reached the point where we were able to delineate the roles. But the mere fact that you have a chief of staff, a executive secretary together might cause some problems, and you have to consult what are the duties that are not found in the ES to make sure that there are no duplication of duties, and which is quite and at that point fortuitously Secretary Ping De Jesus offered to resign. That's why he was, instead of chief of staff, let's move you na lang to DOTC. And so the whole discussion became an academic.
Yeah. So, Edwin, is it correct to say that there is some form of accommodation involved in even thinking up a position for someone that he felt needed to be in a position within Malacañang? And in the same way, do you see that happening somehow now? Siguro, for whatever reasons, and what we're hearing is there's a lot of politics involved, and there are, sabihin na natin, political adversaries already working inside. Do you think that there is some form of political accommodation at work here in shifting him to chief of staff from executive secretary?
Well, I think it's obviously an accommodation because the president values also the number of months or years of work that Mr. Vic Rodriguez provided him, so he doesn't want to let go entirely. However, you have to be very sure that you're not going to cause more problems by installing a chief of staff, because the chief of staff position, whatever he needs to be done in the original wording of that order that that President Marcos provided, it was clearly can be done by the office of the private secretary. By the way, there's a private office of the president where that can be handled. The scheduling, all those things can be done by the private office of the president. There's such an office within the office of the president. So you're now providing a very public position of chief of staff, which by and large is just administrative in nature. It's chief of staff because the real power next to the president is devolved to the office of the executive secretary. So one has to be very, very clear that there are no duplication. Otherwise, gulo yan.
Okay,
It will cause an internecine conflict within the office of the president. And you don't want conflict to be happening in the highest levels of government because it's going just to be confusing to the other cabinet secretary. Imagine mo ganito, on a practical level, assuming hindi maayos yung duties niyan, magkakaroon dalawang kampo yan, and then the cabinet secretaries will just go to whoever he's close to, and then you'll have a lot of voices, a lot of whispering within these two camps, which is...
Akalain mo yun, Ed?
Hindi ba nangyari nga rin daw yan nung panahon ni President Noynoy, di ba?
No, hindi. Well, yun yung kwento sa law, but I was telling Ami that the virtue of Jojo Ochoa's executive secretary, that he was the president's lawyer from the very start. The president trusted him. Whenever we're meeting, it was, sabi mo na may balay sama, but the summer is only si Jojo lang. There was no one else there. So it was a very good discussion. And the executive secretary always has access to the president because he stays in Malacañang. So there was no problem whenever we're discussing. And when it comes to policy matters, it's really more of he trusts sila Secretary Butchabad, sila Marojas, Jesse Robredo on the political aspect.
Sir, actually, sir, hindi malino sa amin kung kaninong version ang napirmahan. Kasi we have seen the AO and SO as supposedly drafted by Vic Rodriguez. And then we had over the weekend an announcement na naaprubahan ng AO1, pero we just got a summary. So we don't know exactly what was approved and how much was stricken down after the legal opinion of Juan Ponce Enrile. But given what we've read from the summary of Trixie Angeles, do you see anything objectionable doon sa binigay na posisyon at functions sa Chief of Staff, kay Chief of Staff Rodriguez? For example, I understand yung functions na kinolapse na position ng Cabinet Secretary at yung Presidential Anti-Corruption Commission, that among other things. Hindi malinaw kung meron pa rin siyang bibigyan pa rin siya ng authority to make decisions or to sign documents and contracts as stipulated in the draft.
Ang OES is very clear that he's the only one who can sign by authority of the President. As a cabinet secretary, in our case, we also have a cabinet secretary in the person of Rene Almendras. There was no conflict there because he did not have signing powers. Yung isa namang pinasok na anti-graft commission, it's practically the role of the ombudsman. Nilagyan lang kumbaga ng isang tao sa office of the president. It's really superfluous. That role is really quite superfluous. You saw that in the previous administration. It was a superfluous position. So if you're going to talk about cabinet secretary lang, I think pwede naman niya. Walang conflict yan because normally the cabinet secretary just coordinates meetings, coordinates with the undersecretaries of the other departments kung merong important matters to be discussed. By and large, but the role of signing, the role of making sure that this really came from the president emanates from the Office of the Executive Secretary. And that was really the advanced administrative.
Sir, linawin ko lang. And I'll throw in na rin the Presidential Management Staff. Total, nabanggit na natin lahat ng sumusuporta sa Presidente. No? And maybe if there's anything relevant there, you can touch on that. But I wanted to ask, given all of that, it still remains the prerogative of the President ultimately to arrange his cabinet and to organize his government, hindi po ba? And I guess the other, yung nakakibat na tanong ko doon is, will this potentially show us of the leadership and the management style of President Marcos, however which way he handles this?
Well, obviously, it's a show, if you, what can I say if you put in Mr. Rodriguez as Chief of Staff? Medyo hindi siya, averse siya sa conflict averse siya, si President Marcos. No? So he wants everything to be reconcilable, to have a healthy discussion among the officials in the cabinet. And that's one, in the palace. So that's one way of looking. But it really shows leadership. But again, the leadership will be tested if and when there is if a potential conflict arises. So that's where we see how does the president handle this this conflict of roles or duties.
So you could be avoiding conflicts right now on a personal and inner circle level, but that could only just generate more conflicts that are bigger on a higher level later.
By Secretary Juan Ponce Enrile as a duplication of duties, that will really create conflict. But if it was the original one, and maybe that's not going to be that won't give rise to any conflict.
Pero
sir,
papayag kaya si Attorney Rodriguez nun? Well, yung kanyang resignation, he cited na he wanted to watch his children grow up, ano? Pero yung mga hinihingi niyang additional powers, I don't think that will give him a lot of time to do that. So, there are some suggestions from some quarters, even those who are well allied with this administration, saying na he should just cut cleanly. What do you think of that proposition?
Normally, it's better that way. So far, we have a government that was run under the revised administrative code smoothly. I mean, there will always be banggaan ng ano, pero not in the equality of roles. The hierarchy of roles is very clear in the revised administrative code. I agree with you, Ami, na medyo inconsistent ang reasoning niya na he wants to spend time with his family at the same time adding more power. So it clearly shows he doesn't want to give up some of the powers, assuming there's a duplication. So he wants to continue holding on to some powers of the ES, which is not really proper and good for this administration. So I would suggest, and really, he can be given another position like an ambassadorship. I mean, that's always he wants to spend time with the family. That's a good way of spending time with the family. Or some other place, a chairmanship in a GOCC. That won't take too much of your time as chairman. You're not the one running the entire bureaucracy. That's one thing that you can do. And recognizing also, and you know, pag ako naman yon, ayaw ako magbigay ng problema kay Pangulong Marcos. I'd give in na lang. Sige, para wala ng gulo, I let go. I mean, out of duty to the country and to the president.
That's another observation that the little president is supposed to protect the president, no? Not the other way around. So ano yung basa mo dito sa sitwasyon na to?
Yun kung ikaw ang parang reporter yan, Ami, di ba? Ang sa journalism, ang reporter dapat hindi siya ang news mismo. Ang bida yung news or parang in the government, ang bida natin, yung Pangulo, siya ang bida. You don't give problems to the president such that you become the news yourself. And if you become the news yourself, then that means you're adding gulo to the
but
whole
to that point, dahil nabanggit nyo, parang, I mean, just speaking candidly here, could you talk about that? Yung tungkol din sa bida na yan. How important is it? Yun ang perception ng lahat ng tao na parang you cannot show, especially in your first 100 days, you have to go from win to win, from strength to strength. No? And you don't want to show any weakness, any vulnerability. How real is that, especially for a new administration? How important is that, given that the very fact that we're talking about his executive secretary right now, I think for a lot of people already counts as, nako, may nangyayari yata. It's not necessarily something that you would want. But how sensitive is a government, is an administration, is a president really to any perception of weakness or vulnerability?
It's the same way. It's the whole theory of making sure the president looks good and doesn't become vulnerable is the principle of the buck stops with the president. Pag palpak ang gobyerno, it's alluded to the president. Pag magaling ang gobyerno, it's credited to the president. So everyone must act in accordance to how we make the president, because the buck stops with him. The good that we can give to the government, to the country, we give credit to the president and all that. The problem that we want to avoid being revealed to the country, let's just grin and bear it. Let's take the fall. Let's bite the bullet, or let's take the bullet for the president. That's the whole theory of working for the president, because we really want to show the good side of the president. And frankly, we all started with an expectation that Mr. Marcos won't do well. Diba? So there was this, and therefore the bar of making sure that he's doing good is a lot higher than the previous ones. That's why when he chose a good economic team, that's a good point for the president. He's very professional. So we've added now, hindi pala, he's debunking all our expectations. And that's good for the president. In the same way, if you're creating problems or you cause problems for the president, especially in the office of the president, you're saying that the president is so disorganized. Ano ba? Don't you know how to manage your own people? It goes back to the president. Kasalanan ba ito ng Pangulo? So that's why it has to be important. It is important for any government functionary to make sure that the president, since responsibility lies with him in the end, make him look, credit all the good that can be given to the president, and we take the bullet for the president.
Yes, sir, sabi mo nga kanina, yung executive secretary is the primus inter pares, the first among equals. That's the executive secretary. Pero yung in-announce ni Trixie Angeles na chief of staff over the weekend, his deputy, actually his senior deputy is going to be karango ng cabinet secretary. So,
Normal yun. It's just a rank. It's just a rank. Si Menard Guevara, the OSG, he was also SDS. Ang tawag ng SDS, Senior Deputy Executive Secretary. He was an SDS of Jojo Ochoa. He had the rank of a cabinet secretary. So it
so
doesn't mean that they're
there's
the
no
same
issue there
rank.
of the chief of staff being higher than a cabinet secretary?
No. Nobody's higher than the only people higher than the cabinet secretary is the president and the vice president. So everyone is of equal rank, but the office that it commands in terms of operating within the government machinery, you know that you have to you respect the office of the executive secretary, and because we know that he is first among equals, we defer to him. If he gives an opinion, we follow the direction of the president under the theory that he is acting for and on behalf of the president. That's the principle that we're working in.
How much of this do you think is a result of intramurals putting pressure on President Marcos to act to the point of actually putting his executive secretary and long trusted advisor and counsel aside to the point where talagang he's taking so much flack for this? What do you think this is a result of warring factions, as it were? Yan ang usap-usapan.
I think the Senate hearings would clearly point to something that the executive secretary has done. I mean, normally the executive secretary is always
Sugar ba yan?
Sorry.
Does that have anything to do with a sugar order?
Because that's where it came from, the public pressure. There's always parang, why is it that we're always in the news and the news isn't good? And if you're talking about the executive secretary, may tama ako dyan. Ako yung, you represent me, you're my first among equals. I mean, that's the president, and that's the reason why the ES, in the case of ES Medialdea and ES Ochoa, they rarely talk in public. They let the spokespersons handle it because they're supposed to be managing the government, the business of governance in the executive branch, and that's their main role. But if you become front and center, public pressure is brought to bear on the office of the president and on the president himself. Hindi naman yan because of warring inside. More than the warring inside. Kasi if it's internal away lang yan, I mean, we can survive. Kanya-kanya lang naman unless may magsusumbong o magchichismis sa reporter. But otherwise, internal factions are normal. Nag-aaway yan minsan, but everything is resolved naman once the president makes a decision. Look at this thing. If the president decides, chief of staff ka or out ka na sa office of the president, tapos na yung problema. So if he signs the original order that his AO, not adding the powers that Mr. Rodriguez amended to that order, wala na yan, tapos na yan. It will be quiet. Because klaro that you may have a rank of the president, a cabinet secretary, but my authority is higher. Yan yung klaro yan. In government, you know who is the first, who has primacy over the others.
In the meantime, the president is in New York for the week.
Yes, and this is happening.
How much can fester, or how much will not necessarily fester? I don't know how you count time and days in Malacañang, but how much of a big deal is it not having an executive secretary for a whole week while the president's away?
Roby, we follow the news cycle, diba? You follow more or less the news cycle, but generally, if the president appoints an executive secretary and clearly defines the office of the chief of staff, and there's no duplication of duties, the discussion will be over. You recognize now who is the executive secretary, and everybody looks to the executive secretary as the primus inter pares.
Okay, Edwin.
But the fact that he didn't,
They're still scouting for an executive secretary, Luchi. So I'm sure there will be some time to look into who. I mean, normally, what we would have done is before we took out someone, we take out someone o sino bang pwedeng kapalit so that it's seamless yung pagkalipat. But since maybe President Marcos was on the way to New York, let's set it aside na muna. Anyway, nothing will happen naman in 1 week and nobody can sign.
Very quickly,
Wala
because we're
naman.
almost out of time, but just the other side of that question, then couldn't this have waited for the president to come back?
Well, that depends on the pressure that was brought to bear on the president, because he wouldn't have acted unless there was already pressure, public pressure, that is medyo mabigat na, that he has to act on it.
Okay, Edwin Lacierda, former presidential spokesperson, maraming salamat po.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
And let's start up another conversation after the break. Please stay with us.
The United Kingdom is making its final farewell to Queen Elizabeth II.
Libo-libo ang nagtungo sa United Kingdom, kabilang ang mga world leader.
A funeral mass is happening now at the Abbey, being attended by the royals from around the world, as well as head of states and other dignitaries. President Ferdinand Marcos Jr.'s sister, Irene Marcos Araneta, is also in attendance. Meanwhile, there will be a 2-minute silence in the Abbey and across the nation after the mass. Finally, Queen Elizabeth II will be united with her husband, Prince Philip, forever in eternity.
Welcome back to the Chiefs here in One News. As we speak, Queen Elizabeth II's remains are on their way to Windsor for the last time. We give her a final salute with historian and Professor Xiao Chua. Professor Chua, welcome back to the Chiefs.
Makasaysayang gabi sa inyong lahat.
Yes, sir. Salamat po for joining us tonight. Sir, simple question. How is Elizabeth II going to be remembered?
Ay, malaki ang papel niya, no? Una sa lahat, sa haba ba naman ng kanyang pamumuno, 70 years, she did a lot of things. Ang lagi kong sinasabi nga sa lahat ng pagtatanong sa akin, she was able to transition the British Empire from being an empire, diba, during the beginning of her reign. And of course, we do not say that it was only her, no? There were nationalist movements around in all those colonies. But in many ways, she was able to facilitate it and eventually created the colonization of these countries and eventually created what we call the Commonwealth of Nations. And that imperial band, yes, pero ngayon parang cooperation is the focus of that organization. Now, so that's one, ano, from and remember that being an imperial power, 'di ba, which is an anomaly, 'di ba, to becoming Britain, despite the fact that of course they have parties, they have political bickerings, but they're more or less stable, and the democracy is working. In a world where today, as you can see, strong men and anti-democracies are emerging. So, yun ang maganda doon. She was able to shepherd Britain and became a very good constitutional monarch, being silent most of the time in politics, speaking when she have to, being constant and dutiful and somehow changeless, but changing when it needs to. So I guess that's how she's going to be remembered, as the real embodiment of the of this belief, at least, that the monarchy is the one uniting the nation, uniting and expressing a brand Britain, shall we say.
But on the other hand, within the Commonwealth, merong mga movements ngayon, of course, to stop recognizing the British monarchs, no?
Yes.
Hindi naman, not necessarily to break away from the Commonwealth, pero ano magiging epekto niya considering that you have a new king who will have to gain the kind of support that Queen Elizabeth enjoyed, and of course, he's not as popular as the Queen. Ano yung future ngayon ng monarchy and the Commonwealth under King Charles III?
Well, baka magsaya pa yung mga British pagka yung Commonwealth ay nabuwag I mean, some people are even thinking in Britain that the Commonwealth, di ba, is a symbol of their past, imperial past. We were once great. But a lot of people are also thinking na parang sa Britain na parang syempre a lot of these countries were are still third world countries, shall we say. Na parang ang dating, sila ba ay mas nakikinabang bang lahat sa cooperation o yung Britain ay nagbibigay doon sa cooperation na yon? So parang may mga ganong perception. Pero just in case, sabi nga, even if there were already countries who broke away, became republics in the Commonwealth, but they stayed with the Union in many ways. So I guess it would be just business as usual. And remember that Prince Charles, now King Charles III, had been an advocate for a long time of multiculturalism. So I do hope that he would continue that, no? Understanding, for example, during the time when there was a stigma against Muslims dun sa terrorism, war on terror, di ba? And all of these things. He was even before that. He was speaking in accepting the Muslims. Even if he was Church of England, he would be Church of England head. When now that he is king, he was already accepting of many faiths. He said that his journey to his own faith is, informed by the faiths of other peoples. So parang yun ang makikita natin. Na sana makita rin ng baka nakikita rin naman ng mga Commonwealth, but just the same, people should respect. Just in case that these countries want to totally bolt out or take away the English monarch as their head of state, no? It should be respected. But
Professor,
it remains to be seen.
But at the same time, there seems to be a sense of inevitability to that. Na parang medyo soft landing nga lang to. I mean, the fact is, this is not the first monarchy emerging into a post-colonial world. Marami ng mga templates dyan, di ba? Spain, Denmark, you look across Europe, meron pa ring mga monarchy, pero parang ano bang nagiging role? I mean, if you look at, precisely to that point, if you look at the monarchies that are technically still there right now in Europe, dun ba papunta ang monarchy na to? And ano yung natitira na role and function ng mga monarchy in the modern world?
Hindi, ito yung may nagsabi yata nakalimutan ko na kung sino, hari ng Egypt, noong unang panahon pa. Sabi niya, sa mundong ito, 5 hari lang ang mananatili. 5. 4 nasa baraha, tapos yung hari ng Britanya. No? Bakit? No? Bakit? No? Kasi una sa lahat, bagamat meron din silang mga scandal, 'di ba, yung mga ibang royal family. Yung royal family of Spain, 'di ba? Parang kasing naging yung British royal family, parang siya yung naging pinakamagandang soap opera sa lahat ng mga monarkiya. No? So, may sense of duty, pomp, pageantry. Pero yung nagiging usapin ka, dahil may katulad ka ni Prince Andrew, nung panahon na ito, yung siyempre may Meghan Markle ka ngayon, ano? Tapos yung fascination natin sa British royal family, kahit mga Pilipino, layo-layo natin eh. Ano bang pakialam natin dyan? Ang nakakalimutan ng iba, o hindi na naabutan ng iba, si Princess Diana. Siya talaga yung parang link natin kasi we saw a princess na sobrang maganda, beautiful, pero sobrang problematic ang buhay, ng problema, dahil kay Prince Charles, di ba? At marami pang ibang factors, but also showed humanity and compassion. So, yun yung, kumbaga, kaya nga excited ng lahat. Kahit si Prince Charles ang Pangulo, ang hari, merong Prince William na inaantay. Kasi nandun si Diana. Yun pa rin yung spirit of Diana kay Prince William. So, yun ang kaya nga some people would say that kahit na sabihin na natin na naging challenge si Diana sa monarchy, dahil may Prince William ka na legacy ni Diana, the monarchy might be able to be as popular, no, in the next few years. And of course, ano ba yung role? Gusto ko sagutin yun, sorry ha. Ano ba yung role for ngayon? Siyempre, for example, iniba nila kasi, they changed the game. They changed the dynamics of what a monarchy should be. So kung ang monarchy noon, naghahari-harian ng hari, parang yung mga politiko natin, di ba? Naghahari-harian. Dito sa Britanya, ang ginawa nilang ang royal family nyo, nagsaserve sa inyo. Nagsaserve sa inyo. So parang nakita ng Britanya yon kay Queen Elizabeth, na kahit na hindi naman siya perfecto, there were times na nagkakamali din siya, pero nakita nila na nagsilbi siya. She tried her very best. At maraming members of the royal family na ganun din. So that's one, nagiging parang ambassador of goodwill to other countries. And also, yung tourism. Pagka nakita nyo, di ba, gumastos sila dyan sa funeral na yan. Pero paminsan-minsan lang yan eh. Kapag pupunta yung mga turista sa Britanya, sa mga palasyo nila, na may totoong mga hari at reyna, mas exciting yun. Kesa doon sa mga pinupuntahan mo yung mga palasyo na museum na lang. So may mga ganong, may mga ganong, marami pang iba, pero yun yung mga basic na parang role nila talaga is really identity. Very cultural. More than practical, although meron na rin on the practical side.
Pero wala bang risk? I mean, parang parang napakalaki pa rin ang pag-asa, lalong-lalo na bagong-bago pa ang reign ni King Charles, di ba? But a lot of it, even yung mga pinag-usapan natin na yung mga Commonwealth countries ngayon, and the former colonies, you also get the sense that a lot of these things were, there was a lid on it, precisely because by the moral history and the life story and the narrative of Queen Elizabeth, people were, sige, kahit galit ako sa imperialistang Britanya, sa respeto ko, sige, tatahimik muna ako. But isn't there a real risk and a real reality right now na after a period of mourning, eventually people will not be as polite anymore. They will not be as polite about the colonial realities. They will not be as polite about the imperial legacies. And they will not be as polite about what taxpayers in Great Britain are paying to maintain a royal family.
Yeah, definitely. Nakikita na natin ngayon eh. Hindi pa nga tayo tapos sa period of mourning eh. The next day after the Queen died, ito na rin yung discourse. Na kumbaga parang naisip ko nga eh, ang tagal ng issue nito, ngayon lang nagsasalita yung mga tao. Pero yun yung isa. And kailangan harapin yan. So ang iniisip ko nga dyan, paano haharapin ng British monarchy yung ganyan ngayon na parang pananaw. Baka sa palagay ko, kailangan mag-open up kasi Charles. Kasi sinimula naman na ng Reyna yan noon eh. She apologized in New Zealand, for example. And she said that things could have been done better in a speech in Ireland. Diba? Na yung IRA ay alam naman natin na matinding kalaban nila yan, pero nakipag-peace sa kanila. No? Sa yung Irish Republican Army. At maganda yung relasyon nila ngayon with the Republic of Ireland. At nag-alay pa nga yung ang bulaklak ng Reyna dun sa mga heroes ng IRA na basically yung organisasyon na nagpasabog sa kanyang uncle, di ba? Na si Lord Louis Mountbatten. So, I hope, ako yung parang moving forward dyan, malay mo, isoli na nila yung mga diamante. Di ba? Hindi naman nila laging sinusuot yan. Alam mo, baka yung mga diamante na nasa korona ng Reyna at ng Hari, di ba, yan ay legacy ng kolonya yan eh. I do not know kung one gesture would be to give up some of them, di ba? Hindi naman, alam mo yon, but we do not know. Let's wait and see. Pero again, ang maganda naman kasi sa monarkiya, they don't talk about these things a lot. Of course, definitely, you will always put your best side. Ang maganda dito, hindi naman nila pinagtatakpan eh.
Professor Xiao.
Yes.
Ako, ang tanong ko lang naman, no, bilang isang Pilipino, marami rin kasi nagsasabi, ano ba pakialam ng mga Pilipino dyan sa Queen Elizabeth, no, tsaka sa monarkiya sa UK. At bukod sa the fact na, syempre, na-entertain tayo nung The Crown, Netflix. Ano ba talaga relevance niyan sa ating mga Pinoy? Natatandaan pa nga ng marami sa atin, syempre sa history natin, minsan tayong parang blitzkrieg ng mga yan, no?
Sinakot tayo.
Diba? Yan ang mga tumatak sa atin, so bakit ba? Why should this be something significant for us? There's anything significant about it at all?
Well, alam nyo, that's a very valid question, Ma'am Luchi. Napaka-valid ng question na yan. Ang sinasabi ko nga dyan, yung connection natin with the British is really, education. Maraming nag-aaral sa Britain, ng mga scholars natin. May humanitarian connection kasi pag may mga kalamidad, nagkakaroon din ng tulungan. Diba? Yes, sinakop tayo nung 1700s. In fact, ninakawan nila ang Maynila nung panahon na yon at yung mga treasures, cultural treasures, kinuha nila. No? May mga ganyan, cooperation, di ba? Plundered. May cooperation na nagaganap din through, alimbawa, yung Iloilo, ng mga British yan, yung pinaunlad nila through Loni. Si Nicholas Loni, pinaunlad yung sugar industry nung panahon ng Espanyol. At may mga British trade agreements pa rin tayo, But this is what I can say, As a historian, I'm looking at it as, syempre, lahat naman ng tao, universally, ay fascinated sa kadakilaan. That's one, Kaya tayo nanonood nitong spectacle na to. Number one. Pero ang interested ako dito, what lessons can we draw from the royal family? So number one, ako kasi, wala akong pakialam kung mawawala yung British monarchy eh. Bahala na yung mga Briton dyan. Pero kung nakikita ko ngayon na may sense sa kanila yan as a guiding force, as a unifying symbol of their identity, ano yung meron tayo na magkakaisa din sa atin? At mahalin natin yung mga simbolo na yun. Si Jose Rizal ba yan? Ang watawat ba natin yan? Diba? Nagkakaisa tayo. Kasi yun naman yung identity natin. So iniingatan nila yung kanila, ngayon yung link nila sa past, tayo, wala tayong pakialam sa past. Binubura natin ang nakaraan at binabaliktad natin ang nakaraan. Yun ang nagustuhan ko rin sa mga British. Kahit na hindi naman sila yung magsasabi ng masamang ginawa nila yung mga royalty. Pero wala akong nakitang pinigilan nila na historiador na ungkatin lahat yung mga colonial colonial legacy na yan. It's being openly yun yung kaugnayan ni yung Duke of Windsor, yung uncle ni Elizabeth sa mga Nazi. Di ba yung dating king na nag-abdicate, na sympathizer pala ng mga Nazi?
Right, si Edward.
Lumalabas ngayon at wala
Si
naman
Edward.
silang ginagawa
Yes.
para sabihin na mali yun. So, parang sa akin, ang gandang halimbawa, of course, I will not talk about the bad things that my father did, for example, but I will not, twist history for it. Diba? So, yun yung nakikita kong ilang pwedeng tignan natin bilang lesson. What unifies us, that despite the fact that we have a turbulent political climate here in the country, that we can still all agree para hindi naman tayo mag-break apart as a people.
So, unity.
True unity.
At saka walang historical revisionism.
Correct.
Gusto ko sana ito ihabol eh. Kasi, Prof, last question lang. Pero medyo lilis ako ng konti. We're almost out of time eh. The 50th anniversary of martial law is coming up on Wednesday. I know that you've been doing the rounds, going to sites that are known for the past, nung panahon ng martial law. How different is this commemoration going to be from the previous years? And how different is it from what you would have wanted it to be?
Well, of course, martial law as a tragic moment in our history is recognized by our laws and the state. No? May mga batas tayo na nagre-recognize ng mga human rights victims. Now, people will deny it, but there are documented 11,103 cases now that were compensated. We do not know the whole extent because documentation is lacking, but still they were recognized by the government. And so, ako naman parang hindi naman to holiday even noon eh. Wala rin naman parang big government commemoration except during the 40th commemoration of martial law wherein Noynoy Aquino offered the writ at nabantayog ng mga bayani. So yun lang naman ang government. So inaasahan natin na like all these years, the cause-oriented groups will have commemorations all throughout the country, different institutions, different schools. We just hope na siyempre kung 50th ito, may state recognition, state rights that would happen. But of course, we all know that would be awkward since si Bongbong Marcos ay anak ni Marcos, di ba? But still, maganda pa rin that we can still have this little, scattered little commemorations all around na organic and mas, shall we say, mas pinupuntahan ng mga tao o mas mag-engage sa mga tao about, not forgetting. Kasi at the time when people want you to forget, commemorating and remembering is love of country and is a sort of personal heroism.
Okay, Professor Xiao Chua, maraming salamat po.
Thank you, Prof.
Mabuhay po kayo.
Thank you, Professor.
And that is it for the Chiefs. We hope what was discussed will keep the conversation going. Ako po si Roby Alampay.
Pamintuan of the Philippine Star.
I'm Luchi Cruz-Valdes of News 5.
I'm Ed Lingao. We are One News, all sides, all the time.